The 1886 Union County Courthouse stands today as imposing physical evidence of much of Union County's history. A southern Piedmont of North Carolina County, Union was formed in 1842 by act of the General Assembly of North Carolina at the petition of local residents. The county was carved out of the eastern part of Mecklenburg County and the western portion of Anson County. Like all other counties in North Carolina, Union was required by law to keep and maintain a courthouse. On April 5, 1843, the Superior Court, which was controlled largely by Union County's cotton planters, met in a cotton gin house at Labatt's Crossroads near Houston to discuss the construction of a courthouse that would meet the county's needs. The courthouse served as a meeting place for planners on governmental and personal business, and it stored the small body of records needed to validate land and contract claims. The courthouse block was bounded by Jefferson Street on the north, Franklin Street on the south, Haynes Street on the east, and Lafayette Street on the west, as is the present square. One interesting aspect of the courthouse square was a wooden bell tower that stood in front of the courthouse near the north curb. The wooden bell tower was 16 feet long and 40 feet tall. The bell within the bell tower served many purposes.
Well, this is the original court bell for Union County. It originally stood on a 40-foot bell tower outside of the original courthouse, not the current brick structure that's in place today. It had a number of uses. One was to announce court. Whenever the judge would be in town and he was ready to sit for court, the sheriff or the bailiff would come out and ring the bell to let everyone know that the judge was ready to hear the trial. It was also used to announce when the verdict was ready to be read, when the jury had reached its verdict and everybody was outside the courthouse. The courthouse was not a big structure, so everybody was outside on the porch or milling around the street, and when they needed to come back into the courthouse to hear the verdict be read, the bell would be rung. Other than that, the bell had many other uses. The 40-foot bell tower was actually located across the street from a couple of historic buildings. One was what everybody knows as the old City Hall. Originally that was the county jail. And beside that building was a volunteer fire company. It had a hook and ladder company and really a bucket company. This was the fire alarm. When there was a fire in Monroe, this bell could be rung and volunteer firemen would come and respond to that. Now, this bell was outside of the courthouse until this structure was built in 1886.
In March 1885, the Union County Board of Commissioners decided that the government of Union County needed a radically different sort of building where government business could be conducted.
In 1885, the Board of County Commissioners hired architect James Holt to design this building. Holt combined a variety of styles to create public building characteristics in the 1880s America. He used the red hard brick set closely together that you see here, which was a technical advance in the 1880s. It was state-of-the-art for building construction. Building construction techniques were quite different than they are today. One feature of this building that is different from the way buildings are constructed today is this building does not have a foundation. They simply dug the footers, tamped the dirt hard, and then started laying the bricks. The walls are about 2 feet thick at the bottom, and if you examine the exterior or interior of this building, you'll note that there are no cracks in the brick, so that has stood the test of time. Holt also added Italianate details to the porches and chimneys to make it look cosmopolitan, give it that European look, which was popular at the time. He included the bell tower. The building had precisely the same look with minor variations as a number of public buildings built throughout the United States in the 1880s.
In September of 1885, the first construction contract was let to J.T. Hart for $20,500. By 1888, construction on the courthouse had ceased, and Holt and Hart received their final payments. The Board of Commissioners accepted the second courthouse as completed on March 4, 1889. The Commissioners didn't need more office space. In fact, the second courthouse only had 2 or 3 more offices than the original courthouse had. However, the building suggested to the citizens of Union County that the county was moving away from its old neighborhood organization and shifting toward becoming more like the trade and commercial centers of the Northeast and the Midwest. The county government did not immediately move into the new building. Some offices transferred, but others remained in the old courthouse as late as the spring of 1891. The old courthouse had been moved across Haines Street to the east of the courthouse square before the second courthouse was built. The building was eventually moved to a site on Jefferson Street about 2 blocks away and was used as a livery stable. With the exception of roof repairs, occasional painting, replacing broken windows, and the attaching of a wooden cornice to the outside of the courthouse, there were very few physical changes made to the building during the last 10 years of the century and the first 10 years of the new century. In 1903, the courthouse did undergo one major change as a clock was installed in the building's tower. Thomas Holt included a tower clock in his design of the courthouse. However, the tower clock and its dials were not installed during construction.
We're on the clock level, and as you can see, this is the replacement E. Howard number 2 clock. This serial number 2183. And the pendulum, you can see, goes through the floor. That's the still the 8-foot shaft pendulum with a 75-pound bob. I find it absolutely fascinating. This piece of thin spring steel has this pendulum hung on it, 75 pounds. This piece of spring steel has been swinging back and forth since 1903. I think that's absolutely fascinating and a testament to American engineering. What you see now is called the escape wheel. This is the piece of the clock that actually regulates time. E. Howard, this is a for the time period, this was a brand new patent for E. Howard. It's called a self-oiling escape wheel. So now we're in the 3rd level, or the clock dial level of the tower. This is the very top, and behind me you can see the back side of one of the dials. That's actually the dial that faces west. We just came from the clock level. There's a shaft, as you can see, that comes up through the floor into this transmission mechanism. From this transmission mechanism, there's a shaft that goes out to each of the 4 faces. It is an engineering marvel that you have all of those gears down on the clock level. You come up through this set of gears. It goes out to a clock face. It runs through another set of gears that you can see and turns an hour hand in perfect time with a minute hand on 4 different faces.
In other, even less tangible ways, the use of the courthouse changed in the first part of the 1900s. Customs that had been acceptable in the courthouse before 1900 changed rapidly. In the early years of the courthouse, men had always chewed tobacco and expected to simply spit its juice on the floor. For that reason, commissioners had provided sawdust that was spread on the floor and removed periodically, especially during court terms. A year or so after salaried employees began to occupy the courthouse full-time, this time-honored tradition was ordered stopped. Ashcraft Brothers was paid 75 cents to provide 100 cards informing courthouse visitors not to spit on the courthouse floor. In 1910, the county government, city aldermen, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy combined their efforts to renovate the courthouse square, turning it into a center for symbolic and developmental activities. Before 1910, the square was open to any public use by any county resident. Afterwards, it was used only for public speeches, 4th of July parades and festivities, farm and home demonstration exhibits and activities, and a display of captured steals. In the winter of 1910, the Daughters of the Confederacy began a drive to finance a large stone monument to Union County's Confederate dead. The monument was unveiled during a dedication ceremony on July 4, 1910. Union County's government greatly expanded over the next 15 years, and by 1925 the courthouse had nearly burst its seams. Routine maintenance had been neglected, and the courthouse was in need of a general renovation. A report in 1925 stated that the first floor is used for the offices of the sheriff, auditor, register of deeds, and clerk of court, and a restroom for ladies. Not a very inviting one either. The second story contains the courtroom, the offices of the farm demonstration agent, welfare officers, and superintendent of schools. The attic is used mainly for old records.
Many of the records stored in the south room of the attic were valuable and needed to be preserved. It was recommended that the north and south attics of the courthouse be cleared of all useless paper, rubbish and filth, the walls and floors swept, and that the work of keeping the attics cleaned be assigned to the courthouse janitor as a regular duty. Equally hazardous conditions were found in the basement of the courthouse. It was reported that the basement was unbearable and a disgrace to the county. Because of standing water in the basement, the toilets could not be kept sanitary, and the odor coming from them was sickening. It was recommended a drain sufficient to carry the water off be installed in the basement toilets, and disinfectants be used to keep the odor down. Although these problems were taken care of, the need to expand the courthouse was obvious.
In 1926, commissioners hired Charles Christian Hook to prepare and submit for the board's approval 3 plans for renovating the courthouse. Hook had to plan additions that would match or complement the existing Victorian style of the courthouse, plus plan extensive renovations in a building that had been overused and underbuilt for the county's needs since the 1920s. The board decided on a complete renovation of the courthouse with additions on both ends. The renovations were completed about 1 year later, and all county government was consolidated into one place. In addition, commissioners were able to offer office space to the county library and the City of Monroe government.
Shortly after completion of the courthouse renovations, Union County's economy began a steep decline that ended in complete collapse in 1931. As part of a program to cut costs during the Depression, the Board of County Commissioners decided to hold maintenance to a minimum on county buildings and discontinue some services altogether. The courthouse received no routine painting from 1927 to 1932, when the board ordered J.P. Marsh be allowed to use $1,000 of the county's federal relief fund to paint the courthouse, the county home, and the jail. In 1936, in January, the board paid $3 for minor plumbing repairs. Several repairs were also made to the heating system between 1930 and 1940.
Despite the cutbacks on maintenance, the courthouse and Courthouse Square remained in good shape through 1940. The square now contained 2 iron drinking fountains of antique design and benches under the great magnolia trees. Also on the square was a monument erected by the Union Daughters of the Confederacy, while the marker to men who fought in the Revolutionary War was located in the southeast corner of the square. By 1940, the Union County Courthouse had been transformed from a meeting place into a modern office building, while greatly expanding its role as a center of symbolic and development activities. After 1940, county government continued to expand, but not in the courthouse itself. The courthouse remained the center of the county's record-keeping and symbolic activities, but it lost some of its importance as a center for developmental activities. County government activities were gradually transferred to state and federal agencies directed from Raleigh or Washington, D.C., or by local, state, and federal officials who occupied rented office space in Monroe. Other county development activities came to be housed in outlying county-owned buildings. In 1951, the board purchased the old Ellen Fitzgerald Hospital Nurses Home for $20,000, and 3 years later, the public library vacated its room in the courthouse and moved into the renovated nurses' home. After World War II, textile manufacturers began moving to Union County. This industrialization continued steadily through the 1950s and 1960s and created a larger tax base to be collected and administered by the county. It also created a larger demand for county services.
Employees hired to meet the needs of the county residents in the 1950s and 60s were located in various county-owned and rented buildings in Monroe. By 1965, it was evident that county government needed a new office building, and planning began that year for a new building to house county government. As plans progressed on the new building, it was suggested that the old courthouse be used as a cultural center or office space for county or civic organizations. One proposed tearing down the old courthouse building and have the new one built on the same site. It was even suggested that it be demolished and replaced with a parking garage. Each of these proposals generated lots of opposition, and after initial questions were raised, the attention turned to the construction of the new courthouse, and no decision was made.
The new courthouse was completed in 1971. County government moved into the new building, and the question of what to do with the old courthouse arose again. In September 1971, a committee of county residents was formed to investigate the courthouse's fate. The committee held its first meeting on September 20th and discussed all actions concerning the courthouse taken to date, including designation of the site as an historical structure by the U.S. Department of the Interior.
4 days after the committee met to discuss what to do with the old courthouse, 80 Union County residents met at the new courthouse with John G. Zemer, an architectural historian with the North Carolina Department of Archives and History. Zemer told the audience that the courthouse had statewide historical significance. He said the courthouse had 3 possible uses: a museum, organization headquarters, or clubs in the upstairs rooms, rented office space and shop space on the lower floors. He went on to warn the group that the restoration would be expensive and that most of the money would have to come from local resources.
Discussion about the old courthouse diminished after these initial efforts, but resumed in 1978 and centered on the repair of the clock and the removal of the steel cross atop the courthouse tower. Despite its physical inadequacies, the courthouse remained important to Union County residents, especially to older ones who had lived their entire lives around it, as a symbol of prosperity and peace. In 1979, the courthouse clock was repaired by Allen McDonald, a Cabarrus County farmer and caretaker of the Cabarrus County Courthouse clock. He was paid $250 by the Union County Historical Society. Later that year, the cross atop the courthouse clock tower was removed and replaced with the original weather vane. The cross was placed there originally by the Gold Star Mothers to honor the World War II dead. Afterwards, according to the Enquirer-Journal, it eventually lost its original intent and became something of religious significance. In 1980, the Board of Commissioners began to organize the restoration of the courthouse. In January of that year, $49,000 was set aside for the project, and commissioners explored the possibility of federal funding. The North Carolina Division of Archives and History approved the plan for the exterior restoration in April 1982, and work began 3 months later. A little over 4 years later, the restoration of the old courthouse was complete, and a rededication ceremony was held in September 1986. Since 1986, the courthouse has primarily been used as a setting for ceremonies and other special events. The last county office to occupy the building, Union County Tax Administration, moved out of the old courthouse in July 2008 into newly renovated offices at the Union County Government Center. The Union County Courthouse, which opened in 1971, became the Union County Government Center, and the Union County Judicial Center was opened in 2005. Today, the courthouse's sole occupant is the Union County Heritage Room, a research facility featuring books and files on local history and families and other historical documents. The stately old 1886 courthouse has served many purposes in its time, as a meeting place, auction lot, ceremonial center, and office space. And, after more than 125 years, the courthouse remains the most recognizable structure in Union County and endures as a symbol of prosperity and continuity.